Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Francis Tapon. In this episode, I have the founder of Gossamer Gear. He and I hike up a mountain in San Francisco, and along the way, I recorded the whole conversation. And it's a fun conversation. We talk about so many different things. For example, we talked about what his lightest backpack is. You'll never guess how light it was. It's absolutely incredible. He talked about why Gossamer Gear has gone to heavier gear options. What are some of the cool fabrics that are on the horizon? How to get sponsored. Everybody wants to know that. And he talks about how you can convert quickly to metric. What's his favorite backpack? And also, what are some things that were unexpectedly hard about starting a backpacking company? That he talked about how he almost died twice, and also his coolest invention, which is the Crotch pot. You got to listen to this episode. It's hilarious, it's fun, and you'll learn a ton. Welcome, everybody, to Glen Van Peski.
Today, we are going for a little hike, a stroll maybe, with Glen Van Peski, the founder of Gossamer Gear. Welcome, Glen.
Thanks, Francis. It's good to see you again.
Glen actually met me at the end of my Pacific Crest Trail hike in 2006 in Campo, Mexico, on my southbound hike. And he drove all the way out from San Diego, which is at least 2 hours, right?
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah, and then we went back to his house, and it was great. He's sponsored my little escapades for over a decade now, and so but I haven't seen you in probably almost a decade.
Well, and I actually hiked on the PCT with you briefly, met you on the trail, which was amazing that you can find someone on a 2,600 mile trail. But yeah, I found you hiking north. I think you were hiking south. That was a yo-yo, I think, wasn't it?
No, I don't think it was the yo-yo was on the CDT, on the Continental Divide. But yes, you went north, and we were running a bit late, and you kept hiking higher and higher and higher, and finally you ran into us, and then you turned around and hiked back with us.
Right. I remember seeing you, and I think you were carrying an old G5 or something upside down because something had ripped out.
It was a murmur.
Murmur? Okay. And you being creative, like, well, it still has a drawstring, so that's now the bottom, and made it work.
Yeah, exactly. It was, I can't remember how weight, that was probably a 5-ounce backpack. And so, yeah, the bottom had torn, and yeah, we just flipped it upside down, and there was only like 5 pounds of gear in it. So it was not a problem.
I just always remember that image of like, as you're coming into view, looking at the pack, it's like, well, it's kind of familiar, but it's not quite right. What's trying to figure out what was going on?
So you've kind of pioneered this whole super ultra light category. So I would say Ray Jardine is kind of famous for having popularized the ultra light category, but you took it to a whole new level. How light have you gone on the most extreme hike?
Well, I've done under 3 pounds base pack weight, so that's everything but food and water. I had a plan to do under 2. I actually had a gear list. Figured I'd be, I'd do a section through the desert and then hike at night, so you don't need a sleeping bag or shelter, and then just sleep during the day. But the buddy who was going to go on that trip with me, I forget, he couldn't go. So I thought, well, if I'm by myself, 2 pounds might be a little light. So I went with 3 pounds. So I've done a trip on the PCT for, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 days with a sub 3 pound base pack weight.
That's remarkable. I mean, I did what's called there's this guy named Steve Chase who he took up finally. It took me 10 years to take up on my 1 kilogram challenge for El Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And that was, and he actually took up on it. So that's 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. And he actually took me up on it. Finally, I said that somebody could do it because on El Camino de Santiago, there's basically huts along the way. And you can even, all you need to do is bring a sleeping bag or a blanket, really, because you're inside of kind of like a hut that's kind of warm, especially in the summer. And so you can actually get it. But what's impressive about you is that you're doing this when you're actually carrying a shelter, right, for under 3 pounds.
I'd have to look at the gear list. In the summer, doing across the Mojave section of the Pacific Crest Trail, you don't really need a shelter. I mean, it's not going to rain. So, but my typical shelter I take is only 2.7 ounces. So it's not a lot of weight, but still.
Is that a poncho tarp?
No, it's just a Dyneema composite fabric wedge, kind of a single side A-frame, not A-frame, but just a very small tarp, basically.
So, Glenn, tell me about Gossamer Gear's philosophy. What makes you unique compared to many of the other backpacking gear manufacturers out there?
Well, I think part of it was we were kind of one of the first. I mean, now I originally started making my own gear just because you couldn't buy really light stuff back then. And now, there were so many cottage manufacturers out there doing some really incredible and creative things. I mean, at Gossamer, our goal is just to help people get into the outdoors and enjoy it more with less weight. So our goal is to, make it more accessible to actually get into the backcountry. Many people in today's busy world only have, they get limited vacation. Maybe they have a 3-day weekend. And, if you're carrying a 15-pound pack instead of a 50-pound pack, you can go further in the backcountry and take advantage of the days you have to really enjoy some of the amazing natural resources we have here.
That's true. And a lot of people think that going light is just about going fast, but it's not necessarily the case.
No, and people go light for different reasons. I have a friend who's a professional photographer, and for him, less gear and lighter equipment means he can take his heavy cameras and get great pictures, because that's what's important to him. So, it's just whatever people want to do, but if you can lighten up your equipment, you have more choices, more options.
GoLite was one of the companies that was also a pioneer alongside with Gossamer Gear, and then eventually they started going heavier, and then eventually they kind of went out of business. Now, you guys also have, over the years, added a bit more weight and robustness to that. Tell people why that is.
Well, and you obviously have personal experience, kind of as we touched on, with a really light pack on your southbound PCT trip falling apart. And so, when some of the early G4s were, 11, 13 ounces for the pack, which was super, super light. But when you get to those really light gear, it requires...
Under 8 ounces?
Yeah. Requires a special level of care. I mean, you have to kind of baby the stuff, and not everyone is willing and able to do that. So, rather than just make gear for the super elite, few hikers, we want to, again, make it more accessible. So, we started using more durable fabric, and there have been changes in the technology too, where you can get now much more durable fabrics. We were the first manufacturer to use sailcloth in the outdoor industry because we were looking for lighter and lighter stuff. But now with the carbon reinforced, and I mean, it's just amazing what you can get for the weight. But our stuff has gotten heavier over the years, just for that durability, so that people have that comfort level, and even if they can't baby the gear, they can still lose some weight and get into the backcountry.
It's a bit about physics. In other words, if you want to make it tougher, in general, you got to make it heavier in most cases.
In most cases, yeah. I mean, obviously there are exceptions with materials, but yeah, general rule, if it's lighter, it's it's more fragile. Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, in your recent lineup, 2019, you are reintroducing, if you will, also pretty light packs.
Yeah, we're always conscious of the weight, and so we try not to just gratuitously make things heavier. I mean, we're always looking at what's the function. Is this necessary? Is there a lighter way to do it? And in many cases, we've had special fabric woven for us that gets us the same performance at a lighter weight. And then we are coming out. I just looked at samples of the 1 and the 2 in Dyneema composite fabrics, Cuban fiber. So, those will be much lighter versions of those shelters. And then I'm working on some, personal projects my goal is an 8-ounce one-person tent. So I think we can get pretty darn close, but we'll see how we go.
Wait a second. Back in the day, I remember you making a tent called The One, and the whole big idea was that it was going to be 1 pound, and you just barely made it. I think it was, can't remember if it was 17 ounces or...
Yeah, you remember correctly. It was 17 ounces, yeah. But
you wimp!
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we were rounding. And then that got, over the years, we were using special sailcloth fabric, but obviously they weren't making that fabric for us specifically. And so eventually, the fabric changed. Still worked great for sails, didn't work for shelters anymore. So, we didn't have shelters for a couple of years while we were looking for replacement fabric. And while we eventually found it, it was a little heavier and the shelter got a little bigger. It's factory tape seams and things like that. So it got up to its current weight, which I don't recall off the top of my head. But the Dyneema composite version that I just looked at was actually 16.1 ounces.
Wow. 16.1. So we'll call that The One.
We'll call that The One. I think that's going to be the 1D or something like that for the Dyneema.
Okay. And by the way, for those who are listening, occasionally you might hear water or maybe wind. We are hiking up the Sweeney Ridge Trail in San Bruno, California, which is a historic trail because it is taking us to the site where Portola, the Spanish explorer, was the first European to lay eyes on the bay of San Francisco. And nobody had seen it for over 200 years of ships going back and forth, never went into the entrance. In fact, Portola himself, who discovered it and saw it, he himself didn't take his sailing ship into the bay. It was only about 10 years later where Ayala went in to the bay with an actual boat and parked at Angel Island in the Bay Area. And while he was parked at Angel Island, moored there, he shot himself accidentally in the foot. And so he didn't even get to explore. He had to stay on the island while his friends went around to explore. So that's just kind of the history. And it's a historic trail, very easy trail to hike up on. But in case you're wondering why we're starting to huff and puff, it's because we're going uphill.
Yeah. We read recently on a road trip, listened to 2 Years Before the Mast, description of the very early California, who was part of Mexico at that point, of sailing up and down. And he talks about their ship sailing into the bay and reprovisioning or picking up cattle skins, whatever they were doing. But it's just intriguing to imagine those descriptions of way back then and how different it was from today.
Right. No, it's so true. I'm curious about the future. You're looking at what's like the hot fabric. I mean, right now, Cuban fiber was kind of like the new innovation that really transformed a lot of the industry. But do you see anything else coming down the pipe that's getting popular? A lot of the stuff, the innovations, if I understand it, come from the sailing industry.
Well, we've actually at this point gotten contacts with fabric manufacturers, and so we've actually had some. We're starting to custom weave some fabric so we can get characteristics that we want, different threads, messing with the thread count, and then we get an exclusive on it for a couple of years before anyone else can use that fabric. And so it's it's minor tweaks, I guess, of trying to get more durability out of the same weight, or obviously reduce the weight a little bit. So that's kind of areas we're expanding into.
Okay, but there's no name yet of these custom fabrics. You haven't branded it yet.
No, people are big on like branding and marketing stuff, and we just want to make great gear and tell people about it.
Glenn, what do you think is the most common error that novice backpackers make, besides, of course, packing too much?
Well, obviously, packing too much is the big one. People tend to pack for their fears. So if you were cold on your last trip, you throw in an extra jacket or you take a heavier sleeping bag. And if you were wet, well, then you carry extra stuff. So, if you can fight that natural response to pack for your fears and fight the last battle, as it were, One of the big areas, especially when you get to lighter weights, is food becomes, depending on the length of the trip, a pretty significant weight.
On percentage terms.
On percentage terms. And most people don't know how much food they need. So, it never looks like very much when you're sitting on your kitchen table. So it's like, well, I'll just throw in a couple extra bars, and then, well, just in case something happens, I should have an extra meal or two. And so I always recommend people to, weigh their food before and after trips, and then divide by the number of days, and pretty quickly you'll hone in on, what your personal number of pounds per day that you need. And then I know what that is for me, and that's what I pack, and I don't take more. And so coming back with that extra food weight is a good way to generally lose quite a few pounds.
That's a pretty advanced technique, and it's something so advanced I don't even do it myself but I should, because I'm horrible at that. In fact, I almost always carry too much weight with food. I always come back with something, and I haven't gotten very scientific about it, and I should follow your advice. The only reason I do carry, I err to bringing too much food is that I can do it because I'm carrying such lightweight gear that I can afford to splurge a little bit on food. And also, the few times where I have run out of food, I realize I start collapsing. I don't have a whole lot of body fat, and I realize the insurance of having that power, that energy, those calories, is such a psychological benefit that if I don't have and I start running out of gas, I can pretty much go forever as long as I have calories. I can keep walking, I can keep going. But if I don't have those calories, I don't have much store of fat, I start slowing down. That's just my thing. But I agree with you that I think that getting more scientific about it, especially on a sure hike where you kind of know exactly you're going to do this many miles, very low probability of getting lost or needing an extra day for bad weather or whatever.
Yeah, and obviously people need to take their personal physiology into account. Most of us, don't have your problem of low body fat, so I could survive a day without food. I'd be unhappy about it, but I would survive it. But yeah, the goal is obviously to be light to enjoy the backcountry. So if you get to a point where you're not enjoying it, or you don't make it back out of the backcountry, well, that kind of defeats the purpose.
But that definitely is great advice, and something I should follow is just getting more scientific and realizing exactly how many kilograms of weight you're going to have. By the way, speaking about kilograms, do you? I really wish we would move on to the metric system in the United States. This is like one of my big pet peeves, but maybe it doesn't bother you. You're just used to it.
I'm used to it, but we have a couple of sons, and the one thing that I always grill them on, one is number of square feet in an acre, just because I'm a civil engineer, and so I just think that's someone everyone should know.
Which is
43,560.
Of course.
But the other is, how many grams in a pound.
Right.
And how many...
Isn't it 1,200? Sorry, 2,200?
No, it's 454 grams in a pound.
Oh, a pound, sorry. I'm thinking of how many pounds I'm thinking the inverse, sorry.
And then the other thing our kids know, and they know I'm going to grill them every time we see them, is, grams in a pound, and then centimeters in an inch, which is 2.54. Okay. So 2.54, 454, you're kind of dealing with the same numbers. And, with those two numbers in a calculator, you can easily do the conversion. But that's not the same as thinking in kilograms, which so you can do, and you think in metric. I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I just hope that one day we're the last country in the world to hold on to an antiquated imperial measurement system. I think Liberia and what's the other country? I think it's starts with an M. It's like Burma, but it's not called Burma anymore. It's
Myanmar.
Myanmar, yeah, exactly. I think Myanmar's already converted to metric as well too. What's your favorite backpack and shelter in all the products that you offer? Because you have a lot of SKUs.
Yes, and actually my go-to backpack is the Murmur. I mean, that's the one that I've personally been most involved in the design, and that's the one that I carry on the majority of my trips. If I have to carry a bear canister, I have an old G5 that I might take. But basically, it's the murmur. And in terms of shelter, if I think it's probably not going to rain, I'll take my Cuban fiber DCF wedge, which is just that 2.7 ounce shelter. Very simple, small. I have had it in rain, but it's not the ideal shelter if you know it's going to rain. If I know it's going to be bad weather, I'll take a larger tarp out of DCF.
Is that the spin twin?
Well, the Cuban version of the twin, yeah, the spin twin, yeah. And then if I know there's going to be bugs, which I, generally try and avoid by picking the season, by not camping near water, camping near a ridge, so I got a breeze. But if I know I'm just in for it, then I'll take a 1.
Got it. Okay, so and the murmur. Actually, now that you mentioned the murmur, on the PCT, my hiking partner, she had, I think, the Whisper, which would preceded the murmur. Is that right?
Oh yeah, the Whisper, the old G6, very basic. Yeah,
that's what she had, I think.
3.5 ounces or something like that.
Exactly.
I think I have one of those somewhere too. Yeah.
So it was because murmur added an ounce or 2 of weight, I think, to the Whisper.
Yeah, it's and it's over the years, it's gotten a little more robust and a little more featured, so it's up to 8 ounces now.
It takes a lot of discipline to have such a sub 8 ounce backpack, because you have to be careful when you put it down on the ground. You don't want to just throw it and toss it and that kind of stuff. And it's just a level of discipline that most backpackers just don't have.
Yeah, you have less margin, and for some things, I think people have done the entire Pacific Crest Trail with it, but obviously for a longer hike where just day after day you're going to be grinding on this and relying on it.
And bushwhacking.
Bushwhacking, it's not recommended for bushwhacking. So
sometimes, like section O on the PCT, we like to call it section overgrown.
Yeah, that could be a problem. If you're climbing under trees and things like that, that could be not the best pack for that.
Tell me about the crotch pot. Is it something in your crotch or what?
Well, the crotch pot is kind of the third way halfway between no cook, where you're just eating cold food, and cooking, where you have to take a stove and a pot and all that stuff. And it's basically using your body heat to warm your food. And everyone knows if you've had a cold night, if your hands are cold, you put them in or near your crotch, because that's just...
Or armpits.
Armpits, right.
Yeah.
Your core, you're trying to get close to your core. So this came up on a trip that I was taking with Henry Shires, Ron Moak, and Brian Frankel, kind of the Brain Trust hike we used to do. And we actually sell this. It's a small pouch out of Cuban fiber with a couple of carabiners that you can slip down into your pants. You put its size so that you can put a Ziploc bag inside it. So you simply put your kind of instant rehydrated meal in the water and hike for an hour or two, and then you've got hot dinner.
Well, maybe warm dinner.
Warm dinner, yeah. It's depending on how hot you are. And
that's true.
Our tagline is, "You're hotter than you think."
That's great. How much does the thing cost, the crotch pot?
I think it's like $20. Made in USA. It's a great product.
Amazing. I hadn't even heard of it, but that sounds perfect for me, because ever since the Continental Divide Trail, I no longer cook. When I just got used to it. I figured if I could go 7 months without cooking, I can go any length of trail without cooking and do fine with it. And I was even in snowy, over about 1,000 kilometers of snow, and I didn't really miss the cook that much. I mean, the cooking ability to cook.
Well, I will make sure that I get a crotch pot to you, and then, maybe next book you write could be like recipes for the crotch pot, things like that.
That sounds like a really attractive book title.
Well, you might get some sales. You just never know.
My mom might buy it, maybe.
Maybe.
You definitely won't.
Hey, I'm always, I can learn from anybody, so I'm sure I could pick up some good. I have figured out a few things that, like mashed potatoes, don't work in a crotch pot, so I don't recommend those.
Really? Why not? Can't you just mix water with dried flakes of mashed potatoes and...
Yes, you can. The problem is they rehydrate too quickly, so it becomes like a congealed mess and doesn't really warm up. So it's better things like couscous or instant rice, dried bean flakes, stuff like that you can put in with the water, and then as you hike, you warm the water, and it slowly rehydrates. Then you end up with a warm meal.
That's a great thing. When I was on the Continental Divide Trail, I would take couscous, and I would then go to bed and put the water in there as long as it's not going to freeze overnight. And then in the morning, after having soaked for 8 hours, I would eat it cold in the morning, and it would work.
Yeah.
But this sounds much better because it's a little bit warmer.
Yeah, no, and it's the same concept, and oftentimes thru hikers they'll put something in a bag, put it in their pack in the sun for a couple hours or behind their neck, something like that. So it's the same concept.
What did you? A lot of backpackers, there's some people are innovative. They like to make their own gear and that kind of stuff, and then several people have been inspired by your example and gone off to create companies of the cottage industry of backpacking. And then some of them have succeeded, some of them have not succeeded, some of them have failed. What did you underestimate when you were creating Gossamer Gear? Something that really was like, whoa, I never realized how complicated or difficult this was going to be as far as building a backpacking company, gear-related company.
Well, and I never really intended to build a backpacking gear company. I mean, I was just making stuff for myself, and then kind of felt bad for other people and tried to figure out a way to make a few things to help them out. And I underestimated the number of people that actually wanted lighter gear. So that was the first big surprise. And then probably the biggest challenge since, I've always been an engineer, so it's always been the backpacking company I've never taken a salary from it, so I didn't really need to build it. So we've grown very slowly, just in response to demand. So that's been a blessing, but the big challenge has always been the manufacturing. We started with my wife Francie and a couple ladies on the street making gear, and then found a guy in Seattle, and then we've had hippies in Colorado and some druggie in Albuquerque, and it's been just getting quality products made is always a challenge.
I thought you outsourced some things to Asia, never?
Yeah, no, now the stuff's made in Asia, and it that works great. I mean, the quality is just impeccable. It's amazing.
Okay. And when did you make that transition to Asia? What year? Or was it a slowly process?
No, it's probably a couple years ago.
Okay. And then all of a sudden the quality jumped up, and then I imagine also the price went down a bit?
Yeah, the price went down a bit. We're not super price conscious. We didn't go overseas to save money. It was just the quality. We just couldn't get both the quality and consistency here in the U.S. and also the scalability. As more and more people found out about the gear and we got more and more orders, we just couldn't find people that could keep up in a consistent manner.
But some things are still made in the U.S., like the Crotch pot.
Crotch pot's still made in the U.S., yes. That's kind of a specialty product. Not everyone can, take full advantage of that product.
And it does go in the front of the crotch. Can you put it in the back? Can you be like a butt stove?
I have not heard that. Now, we have some lady trail ambassadors that use it in their bra, and they say it works well there.
Okay. The bra thing. All right. How about the armpit cooking?
Well, there have been discussions that you could have a whole line, and so you could have, your main course in your pants, and then maybe a side dish under your left arm, something like that.
Now, Glen, you've hiked thousands and thousands of miles, or kilometers, as I like to say. Have you been in a situation or situations where you were potentially in deep danger?
Well, I think it was Andrew Skirka who termed the phrase, you have lightweight, then you have ultralight, and then super ultralight. And I think it was Andrew Skirka that says, and then you have stupid light, right. Which is when you pack too light for the anticipated conditions and your skill level. And
hold on, sorry, let's talk about that, the skill level, because I think that's something that's so misunderstood among people who don't know much about ultralight backpacking.
Yeah, I think you can go, you can certainly get to a pretty light pack weight just with advanced materials. So, you can get a pack that does everything you're used to, has a little frame, padded hip belt and shoulder, all that kind of stuff for, call it 2 pounds today instead of 6 pounds, 5 or 10 years ago. And that's just because of the materials. But to get your pack weight down beyond a certain level, you need to pick up some additional skills. So, for instance, if you need a tent, you're going to have to carry a certain weight. If you get the skills to be comfortable and safe in a tarp, then you can save some weight over a tent. But it requires skills. Tarping requires skills beyond what is setting up a regular tent.
For example, needing to find the right location for that tarp. I mean, just to be in a sheltered position where some people might say, I want to be on the crest and have the great view, and then all of a sudden that may not be best for the tarp.
Well, exactly. And another example is sleeping bags. If you, due to katabatic effects, you can often...
Explain katabatic effects.
Well, cold air settles. So you can, I don't know if you've been hiking along a trail in the early morning, if it dips in, and say you're wearing shorts, you notice that it's colder.
Right, especially by the creeks and streams.
Exactly. So if you know how air moves, you can take less sleeping bag because you're going to select an area that you're not in a cold air drainage. If you're unaware of that, you may need to carry a heavier sleeping bag because you want to be able to just roll out your sleeping bag wherever.
Right.
So that's additional knowledge and skills allow you to take less weight.
Right, and that's a key thing. So was it a stupid light situation where you kind of screwed yourself over?
There have been a few. Yeah, usually my wife doesn't find out about them until years later. But there was time my buddy Reed and I were on the Pacific Crest Trail. And
what section?
Whitewater Canyon. Okay. And we were walking along. There was water flowing, a lot of water flowing when we crossed it. And so we didn't have a lot of water in our packs, but we thought, again, to save weight, we thought, well, why tank up here if the trail's following the river?
Right.
We'll wait till the
high point.
Wait till the high point, or wait till the trail veers away from the river to fill up with water.
Makes sense to me.
No sense here. Yeah, made sense to us. But
and it's also better quality water usually as the higher you go up.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty big drainage. But yeah, so lots of reasons to do that. The thing is, in this particular case, you couldn't actually, the trail was, 50 yards off the wash, so you couldn't actually see it. So an hour later, the water's gone. It's underground. It's still there, obviously, because we'd seen it, we'd crossed it an hour earlier, but it was nowhere near the surface. So
there's no way you're going to go back.
Well, we had to. Because at that point, we were no water.
Oh, shit.
And we didn't know what was up ahead. So, we were dehydrated. We drew straws, and Reed actually went back. I kind of put my head under a bush and tried to conserve what hydration I had, but never really recovered from that. And we got further up the trail, and I got chills. So it's about 85 degrees out, and I'm inside my down sleeping bag, shivering.
Wow. These are all the effects of severe dehydration.
Yeah. And I probably slept for an hour. Wow. And then we got up and had dinner and kept hiking.
Amazing. So what was the lesson learned from that? Is obviously hydrate up even though you think you might not need to hydrate up, or how?
Yeah, water is one thing. It's a very heavy thing, but it has severe consequences for cutting it too close. Severe dehydration.
Much more so than cutting close to your food.
Exactly, yeah. And I've actually cut the water too close twice, didn't learn the first time. So, that's an area that, I build a little more margin in. The other experience, and again, I was with Reed. I don't know why.
Wait a second, we're hiking and you don't have any water on you.
No, that's true, but I also know it's only 1.7 miles, so I'm okay.
And it's not 100 degrees, or let's say 40 degrees Celsius. How about that?
Right. So another time I was hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail, and it had to be early season, late season. There was snow on the ground. and I forget, it was getting dark, I think. And my buddy Reed is looking for his gloves.
This is the same Reed you had the other problem with?
Yeah, the same Reed. You're probably detecting a pattern here.
Reed, are you listening?
So there was once we were hiking at night, because Reed and I had a habit of when the sun went down, it's like if we weren't tired, we'd just keep hiking until we were tired. And so we're hiking along the PCT. It was a road walk section at night one night. And we don't talk much, but I go, yeah, Reed, here we are again hiking at night. And he says, you know, Glenn, I think you're the only person I hike at night with. And I go, Reed, you're the only person I hike at night with. So yeah, the two of us hiking, maybe not the best combination. But there was this time when we were on the PCT around Mount San Jacinto, and Reed's looking for his gloves and he can't find them. And he's, finally stops and he's like taking stuff out of his pack, and he said, I don't know where they are, I can't find them. And I realized, again, this is, you want some training. It's like, okay, he's beginning stages of hypothermia. He's losing, he can't find his gloves, thinks he lost them. And so I said, no, here, put something warm on, sit right here, let me look for him. And I found him because I wasn't hypothermic yet.
Right.
But it was like, it's having that knowledge and being a little ahead of the curve. So, before you get to that point, you find them before you start to lose your mental faculties.
Right, and sometimes you lose your mental faculties so much that you don't realize that you have socks, extra pair of socks that you could wear as a placeholder for gloves.
Exactly, and the insidious part of like hypothermia is, you lose your mental facilities before you realize you're losing your mental facilities.
Right. That's the real danger of it.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me all the time, I want to get sponsored on my hike, I want to go on the Pacific Crest Trail or whatever. And they always ask me for advice on getting sponsored. You guys do have an ambassador program, which is basically your kind of way of sponsoring people. What do you look for in a trail ambassador? What would you tell somebody who's listening to this and says, I want to be sponsored to walk the Wall of China or something?
Our ambassador program it's kind of changed over the years. And so, generally we're looking for people who are going to help us with our mission of getting people out in the outdoors. So although we certainly have some ambassadors that fall in the category of, super hikers that are record holders and FKT holders.
FKT is fastest known time.
We're really looking for more people that kind of ordinary hikers could relate to. Say, oh, wow, that's something cool they did. I'm going to learn something. Someone that can provide some, interesting content for our newsletters, things like that.
And so people who are maybe also good photographers might be interesting if they go out to a lot and take, because Instagram has become a really powerful force recently.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because last night here in San Francisco, we had dinner with two people that I only know from Instagram. The first guy was the first person to follow me on Twitter, I don't know how many years ago. And, I follow, he's quite active in the outdoors and also an amazing cook. So, he's always got these amazing pictures of the fresh dinners that he's whipping up from farmers market stuff.
He doesn't whip them up in his crotch?
No. He's got a very nice house in San Francisco. And then another is a gal, Shell Traveled, Chelle Traveled on Instagram. And she takes amazing photos. It's hard to believe she has a job. I mean, she gets out a lot. She loves being outside. So, yeah, the ability to, take amazing photos.
Document.
Yeah, certainly helps.
Yeah. Glenn, how do you see the transformation of how technology is impacting backpacking? Backpacking is a quintessentially simple, kind of get back to basics, kind of something that would make Ted Kaczynski proud. Get away from technology and all that stuff. And yet a lot of, naturally, it kind of infuses everywhere, technology. And we see it not just in GPS, but all sorts of stuff that now all of a sudden carrying a solar panel or some way to charge up your batteries is becoming an issue. So how do you feel about technology and its role in backpacking? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? What do you think?
Well, for me personally, with the, I'm generally going out with like a sub 5 pound base weight. Technology tends to be heavy. I mean, paper maps are light. My watch has a compass on it and an altimeter. And so any technology I take is generally going to add a pretty big hit to my base pack weight. So I've been, and as you kind of touched on, part of the appeal to me in the backcountry is honing my gear to the essentials and, less than the minimum amount of stuff I need, I guess, to be safe and comfortable in the outdoors. And so if I'm relying on technology and if a battery goes dead, I'm in trouble, is counterproductive to me. That being said, I recently, on a couple trips, I've actually taken my phone on the trip because it's the lightest camera I own.
Right.
So I may only use it for a camera, but then I recently on a section of the PCT pulled up Gut Hook's app, and I mean, that's amazing. I totally see why people use it. I mean, the amount of data available and knowing where you are, where the next water is, where the next campsite is. I mean, it's incredible. I get why people use it.
Gut Hook, how do you spell Gut Hook?
Just like it sounds, Gut Hook.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've heard a lot about it, and I haven't used it yet. Because I have these kind of mixed feelings myself. I mean, the other thing is that but then there's some people who are so anti-technology, and sometimes I want to shake them and say, but guess what? You're wearing a Cuban fiber fabric on top of your body, which is, by the way, it's a technology component. It's not it's not wool, it's not cotton. And so there's also practically everything you're wearing is synthetic, and it should be, by the way, because synthetic is often better than natural fibers in so many applications.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that technology is more than just electronics. And it's great to use. I mean, nobody is hiking in the heavy leather hobnail boots and stuff that they had back then because there's lighter, better stuff.
Right. Where do you see the industry going? Do you think it will get to a point where I keep imagining like a space blanket that has like an electrical dial that you can turn into and say, I want to set it to 25 degrees Celsius and have a nice cozy night in my sleeping bag at the weight, like any kind of applications like that down the pipe where you see really, really pushing the ultralight? Or do you see it always burdened by heavy battery technology?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if we're dreaming out loud here, in the future, maybe there's something that, kind of like a la Dune, pulls moisture out of the air or pulls energy out of solar radiation or something. That would be interesting, but
more efficiently than the current solar panels.
Right. I don't know. To me, complexity is not always my friend. I like simple things. So I like a pack that you can fix with a paper clip and dental floss. Has some certain advantages sometimes.
Right. Where do you, looking forward in your crystal ball for Gossamer Gear 5-10 years from now, what's your vision of seeing it go? Where is it going?
Well, we're not really driven by, sales or marketing or anything like that. We're going to continue on doing what we've been doing, is trying to make, functional light gear that allows people to enjoy the outdoors more. So we'll just keep doing that and see where it goes.
Got it. And is there currently you just released the Ranger 35 backpack that I'm wearing right now as we speak. Any other things coming out in 2019? Or 2020? Sorry.
As I mentioned, we are coming out with Cuban fiber or dynamic composite fabric (DCF) versions of our 1 and 2 tent. I have I'm working on a project for an 8-ounce tent, maybe called the Naked One, that we're working on. That's a little further behind. And then we've got some travel bags that we're working on, kind of applying the function, just the essentials and taking advantage of the technology in terms of fabrics to lighten the load of more traditional travel bags. And then I also have a neighbor who wants me to make a bike packing frame bag for his bike, and that he wants to be lighter than what's available. So, I may tinker around with that. So we'll just see where things go.
Many years ago, this was at least 10, maybe 15 years ago or something like that, somebody told me that, Gossamer Gear, one thing there's that all the small cottage industry companies, unlike, let's say, North Face or Mountain Hardwear, the smaller companies, they have strongly influenced by their founders. And so one person said, Glen Van Peski, because he's tall, he's nearly 2 meters. I love metric. No, you're probably about 1.90 meters. But anyway, you're a tall guy. So therefore, all your shelters are built for tall people. In other words, so therefore they're spacious and nice. But then they said, but he used to, this back when you used to live in San Diego, not used to rain, so it's not as waterproof as some other stuff. Do you think that's a fair statement nowadays or ever?
Well, I think in general, yes, that's true. Our early pack line, the G4, G5, G6, kind of as my base weight and needs got lighter, I designed a new pack, and so that's kind of how we came up with that. And definitely, I'm a tall guy. Grant Seibel, the president of Gossamer Gear, is a tall and big guy. So, yeah, our stuff, generally is bigger, and you've got room to move around. As far as the waterproof thing, yeah, the Spinnaker fabric we had, there were issues with waterproofness. It depended on the batch, and that's why we were out of shelters for a couple of years until we could fix that. But with the fabrics we have now, they're waterproof. We've tested them with a suitor tester. They're factory tape seams, so the waterproofness is not, I don't think that's a valid complaint today.
I agree. We'll take a break here because we're at the ridge right now. The wind is going to pick up a bit, and we're overlooking what's called the Portola Discovery Site, where the first European laid eyes onto San Francisco Bay with his companions.
And that is the end of my interview with Glen Van Peski. You're probably wondering, why such an abrupt end? Why didn't we have a nice goodbye? Well, we did have a nice goodbye, but just not while I was recording. And the reason is that while we were hiking up, one thing I didn't mention is that I had a dog with me. Her name was Daphne. And this is a dog that would just never leave my side. I go to the bathroom, it follows me into the bathroom. It goes everywhere with me. If I just walk across the room, it will get up and go within a meter of me. This dog is extremely clingy, super nice and sweet, doesn't say a word, but just wants to be near me all the time. And so I thought, well, we're going to go hiking together. I don't need to put a leash on her because she's pretty clingy. Well, I should have gotten a clue when all of a sudden Daphne started getting ahead of us, just a bit too far ahead of us while we were hiking up. But she always kind of stayed within sight. And we just kept talking and talking and talking. And eventually we got to the ridge, and there the trail divided into 2 different directions. And Daphne was nowhere to be seen. And I was like, oh shit, what do we do now? So we could either go left or we could go right. And then if we go right, the trail divides into other areas. So I went right, which then the trail divided into 2 or 3 different places. And I told Glen to go left. So as a result, when we got to that part of the conversation, all of a sudden we quickly realized Daphne's not here. And so we abruptly ended the podcast. I went running along the ridge to the right. He went running along the ridge to the left. And eventually Glen met somebody who had seen the dog, Daphne, lower down on the mountain. So somehow she had gotten off the trail, and then we walked by her, and somehow she got back on the trail and couldn't see us and started to go down the mountain back to the car. So when I got wind of that, he called me on the cell phone, and then fortunately, I was able to kind of do a shortcut, and I eventually found Daphne. So we had a happy ending, but boy, it was a scary moment there. And in the end, I had to go rush to meet Rejoice somewhere, and so we couldn't pick up where we left off. We couldn't even get a photo together. We were such in a hurry by the end because we had lost about half an hour chasing after Daphne. That's the long story as to what exactly happened and why we ended abruptly. Still, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Make sure you give me some feedback. Also, I want to give a shout out to a few of my Patreon members who have really helped me out a ton. One of them is Renee Steelman. She sponsored my talk in Phoenix, Arizona for her foundation, which helps people get wheelchair accessible minivans. And she had me speak in front of her community at Rio Verde, which is near Phoenix, Arizona. Very happy about that. Also, another shout out to Tammy Way, who's a very loyal supporter on Patreon, and she's always commenting and giving feedback and sending us questions. I really appreciate that as well. Then there's some people who just never say much on Patreon, and still they're out there supporting me. Then there's Kathy, who also has supported me tremendously on Patreon. If you notice, a lot of the Patreons is sponsored by the Health Access Sumbawa, and that is all because Kathy helps sponsor that. Shout out to her as well.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel technology and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on the latest episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. Here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and want to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ yep, you guessed it, ftapon. That's where you can pick up some sweet rewards for as little as $1 a month. And remember, subscribing to the WanderLearn podcast helps, but downloading each episode helps even more. Please share the podcast, review it, and sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. This show was edited by Rejoice Tapon. The music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.